Okay. So Suzanne's our amazing presenter today. She is the program manager for Our Water, Our World. My name is Kellen. I work for the City of Santa Rosa in the Stormwater and Creeks Department. So we're sponsoring today's workshop, and really happy to be able to share some information that I think will help you all and help our water systems. So Suzanne's been a professional gardener and advisor for over 20 years. She's certified in all kinds of different things, qualified water efficient landscaper. She's Rescape certified. She's an integrated pest management educator. And she has a ton of interesting information. So a little housekeeping. At the end, we are going to have a question and answer. So if you have a question that you'd like to go into some discussion about, raise your hand and we can ask it at the end, or you can put it into the Q&A. Q&A, what I'll do is I'll read through at the end and read those questions to Suzanne so she can talk about them. Or if you want to read it yourself or speak it yourself, you can just raise your hand. If you have a question that's more, technical difficulties, or something that is like you're not understanding what's being said, or you just want to share a quick resource, you can post that into the chat. But for questions that you'd like to have read at the end, try to get those in the Q&A. You're all muted and no video, so that we can just sort of focus on the presentation. But we're glad to have you here. And thanks again. So Suzanne, go ahead.
Thanks, Kellen. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to be going through slides for about an hour. I do have a lot of content. Of course, every topic that I'll be sharing with you today certainly could have its own program. So I will try to just touch on these concepts and introduce them to you. I did load you up with a lot of really great resources that can further support your information or your interest in these topics, and that you can do some more research on your own. But what we're going to learn today is why the fall season is the best time to add new plants to our garden. We're also going to talk about planning now for the rainy season. And then I'll touch on a few seasonal pest prevention tools and tips, and then management tips for deer, gophers, and raccoons. The next program that we're providing next month in October is when I'm strictly going to be all pests that we are faced with throughout the fall and winter. So that one's going to be specifically all about pest management. But today we're going to be talking about some healthy garden practices. Now, if you were signing up for this program to learn more about plant selection, I'm not really talking about plant selection, although I do have some plant lists or resources for plant lists that will help you. So the City of Santa Rosa has an amazing library of webinars that you can view, past webinars that are recorded, as well as a place to see when upcoming workshops are scheduled. So as you see, I took the screenshot a couple weeks ago, and at the time, the Lawn Be Gone, or sheet mulching workshop was scheduled, as well as ours. So just know you can go to this website, to the srcity.org/workshops to get more information on upcoming workshops, as well as viewing past workshops. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Our Water, Our World program, Our Water, Our World is a program that was designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality, with the intention of educating folks about how pesticides work and their impact on our waterways. It's very easy for these pesticides and synthetic fertilizers and other products that we use around the garden to get into our waterways very easily. This program was designed to educate associates within the retail environment, as well as customers, on alternatives to some of those toxic problem pesticides. You'll notice that we have literature racks in most of our retail partner stores, which have it's this rack that's a kiosk of with a library of fact sheets that you can take and read and learn more about less toxic pest management for that pest, such as rats and mice or ants or aphids. You can also go to the ourwaterourworld.org website to learn more information. And we are sponsored by local pollution prevention agencies. And today, as Kellen mentioned, mentioned, it is the city of Santa Rosa, and we're so happy to be a part of that. And since we are an integrated pest management or IPM educational program, I always like to start by just kind of touching on what IPM is. So as a reminder, for those of you that have joined us before, or if you're new, it is a science-based decision-making process. So we use science-based strategies. Okay, there's no, homemade remedies that we maybe learned on the internet. It's actually science-based, and we are going to always look at the system as a whole. So be it the home or garden, to identify what is out of balance, what's going on. We want to understand what the problem is, and we want to then understand if it's a problem that is just going to resolve itself because of the life cycle of the pest, or is it something that we actually have to take some action to manage? And the types of actions we take are cultural controls, which is bolstering the health of the environment, mechanical controls, which are the tools we use to manage the pests, biological controls are the living organisms that we use to manage pests. And then chemical controls are the pesticides. We always use them as a last resort. And of course, we're always going to use the least toxic possible. If this is a plant, for instance, that has always struggled or never really performed to your liking, give yourself permission to remove that plant, and then you can plant something new that actually is going to thrive much better. So our water, our world, our main focus is actually protecting our waterways. And I like to equate our gardens to the watershed that we live within. So we live within the Russian River watershed that starts north of Ukiah and encompasses this grand region, which is very unique and special. It is a rain-fed water system that is going to rely specifically on our annual rainfall. However, since we've been in these years of drought, what that means is that the soil itself is very dry. And what happens is that when we do get rain, that rain is going to either run off over that soil, because the soil is hydrophobic. It's not able to absorb the water. It's not able to allow that water to infiltrate. And then once that soil is able to start to infiltrate and absorb some of the water, it can then recharge some of the systems, such as our reservoirs, our lakes, our streams, our creeks, and then ultimately the river. And how that equates to our own properties, our own gardens, is that everything that we have on our properties is going to either stay on our properties, and when water comes in the form of irrigation, when we're watering our garden with the sprinkler or the hose, or in the event we get rain. And as that water does fall on top of our gardens, we really want to keep that water on site. We want it to infiltrate into the soil. We want to avoid it running over the driveway or flowing down over the sidewalk into the storm drain, because when it does flow into the storm drain, it's taking pollutants with it. It's taking any of those chemicals we might be using around our gardens, synthetic fertilizers, maybe motor oil, anything else, maybe pet waste. And so what we want to do is be mindful of any type of chemicals that we're using around our property, and understand that there are alternatives to these problem pesticides that we can use that will work as well, if not better, and not pose any harm to our waterways. So let's talk about preparing our gardens for the fall season. So we want to take advantage of the fall season to add plants for so many reasons. First of all, why the fall is the best time to plant is because we're experiencing shorter daylight hours. So already we're starting to notice it's getting dark at 7. Pretty soon it'll be 5. We're also experiencing cooler evening temperatures. So when we have cooler evening temperatures, that means overall the plants, the root systems of those plants can actually cool down some. Hopefully we are going to really move into a nice, healthy rainy season. We already did get a tiny bit of rain, which made me very excited. So hopefully it's just the start of a nice wet season. And then also understand that we have a good solid 8 or more months until the heat of the summer next year is at its peak. So if we're planting plants now, we have all of this time for those plants to actually become established without the stresses of the really high peak summer heat. Now we'll still have some hot days, no doubt, but because we have shorter daylight hours and those cooler temperatures, even though we might reach 90, 95 degrees in a day, even up to 100, it's ultimately going to cool those plants down and not be as stressful. We're also at about 10 months until the driest months of the summer season are upon us. So like a year from now, when we're really looking at July, August, and September, those are really the driest months. So again, we have all of this time for those plants, the root systems to really grow and become more established. And then I'd just like to ask this question, and please feel free to raise your hand or just say yes in the chat. Does your lawn look like mine? For those of you that have a lawn, does it look like this? Because this is pretty grim, right? Are you a little overwhelmed at how to move forward when your lawn looks like this? Well, I'm going to walk you through it, okay? So there's a couple things that we can do. And of course, this is not the only thing. This is not the only way that we can handle our brown lawns. There's going to be a number of different ways, but I'm just going to touch on a couple things that will be really helpful. So first of all, if you're looking to convert your lawn and to change it from a lawn to a beautiful flowering perennial garden, you are in luck. There is an amazing rebate that you can get through the city of Santa Rosa so that you can get cash for grass. So this is fantastic. What I encourage you to do before you start your project, please look at the rebate, because there's going to be some caveats. You do need to apply for this rebate, and they do need to see what your lawn looks like before. So that brown lawn is actually desirable. And then if you are going to convert your lawn, or if you've got other areas of the garden that have a tendency to be a problem through the winter months, sheet mulching is ideal. This is ideal for blocking weeds, preventing weeds from sprouting in areas that are exposed, and that might be heavy weedy areas, pathways, borders around raised beds, or even the lawn. And if you are going to go ahead and transition your lawn with sheet mulching, we leave the lawn right in place. We're going to cut that lawn, the edges of it, the perimeter of that lawn area, we're going to cut it 8 to 18 inches away from the edge of walkways and patios or borders, just so that we can then have a nice area where the mulch can kind of go into that edge without spilling over the edge of the walkway or patio. We're going to mark the sprinkler heads so that we know where they are when we need to change them out to make them drip. And then we're going to lay cardboard or builder's paper that's available at landscape supply stores out, layering that cardboard. I like to layer it 2 to 3 layers thick. If you have really crummy soil, you can start with a layer of compost, and then you can put your layers of cardboard. And then we're going to top that cardboard with no less than 3 inches of mulch. Or we can do 1 inch of compost and 2 inches of mulch, or we can do 2 inches of compost, 1 inch of mulch, whatever the combination is, as long as there's no less than 3 inches of some type of material on the top. And if you were to plant directly into sheet mulching project, you're going to start by adding 1 gallon or larger. We're not going to do anything smaller than 1 gallon size pots. We do need to cut a hole in that cardboard, and we might need to spot amend, which means getting some compost and working it into that soil where we're going to plant that plant. We're going to add a little organic fertilizer, and then we're going to allow the top of that soil level in the pot of the plant. We're going to make sure that it's high enough that when we do add that 3 to 4 inches of compost and mulch, that we're not burying the plant. So we do want to allow for that grade to be raised a bit. We're going to then work out that irrigation where we where we marked the sprinkler heads. We're going to convert it to drip, and then we're going to lay the drip out so that the plants can get evenly watered and spaced appropriately. And then we're going to put that nice layer of mulch on top. Then we're going to water that area really well. and we're just going to monitor these plants until they're established. There's also if you are not looking to change out your lawn and you do have an area of pop-up sprinklers in some flower beds, I know this is a little bit of a dated irrigation system. Guess what? There is an irrigation efficiency rebate. So check this out. And this will also give you money for converting your sprinklers from pop-up sprinklers to drip irrigation, because drip irrigation is a much more effective and efficient way to water your garden and saves a lot of water. Some lawn alternatives that we like to share with you. Of course, there is a whole list, but if you're looking to actually change out that lawn that really takes a lot of water to something that's going to be lower impact, that's going to be more sustainable, and definitely a more adaptable for our California summer dry climate. These are just a couple of examples, but please look at the Sonoma County Master Gardener's website. They have a list, a very extensive list of lawn alternatives that are really beautiful, easy to grow, and adapt really well to our climate. Keep in mind, a couple of these are not natives and 2 of them are, but there are a lot of options that are going to thrive with a lot of ease and very little maintenance. And so for more resources for planting river-friendly plants that are going to require little to no water once established, you can check out these resources that I do believe I also included on that helpful gardening resource page. We have the Russian River Friendly website, Water Smart Plant Program, which is the watersavingpartnership.org. Of course, the Sonoma Master Gardeners, the California Native Plant Society, and CalScape. So when we plant plants, we always want to grow the right plant in the right place. And what that means is that we are going to really understand the plant that we're buying, what its growing conditions are once it's established, how big it gets. We're going to look at these tags. We're going to make sure we get a plant that's going to only grow to the size of the space we have. We're going to grow native plants whenever possible, or choose plants that are from the Mediterranean climates, because they're going to adapt to our summer dry climate and they will require less water once established. We're going to always group plants together with similar water needs. So if we're adding new plants to the garden, we're going to make sure that they're going to be in zones that have matching water needs. We're also going to continue to maintain healthy soils. So we add compost and we top that soil with mulch. We're going to protect that soil with mulch, but we add compost so that we can enrich in the soil and really get that organic material content up. We really like organic matter in our soil, and our goal is to always have about 5% of organic matter in the form of compost in our soils. That's going to really hold on to that moisture, helping retain more water, and really increases the health of the microbiology within the root zone of that plant. And when we water, we're always going to encourage root systems to grow out and down. We really want to grow healthy root systems. And as those roots develop, we'll be watering less frequently, but maybe a little bit deeper. So possibly a little bit more water, but less often. And mulch is your friend. So I'm not talking about zone 1 around the perimeters of our house or other structures. We do want to make sure that zone 1 is going to be gravel or concrete or something that's going to not be combustible, but out in the garden areas, we do want to have no less than 2 inches. 3 is ideal of mulch. Mulch is going to be a wood chip, like a hardwood chip, chunky mulch, an arbor chip, or something that we can purchase at a local landscape supply or a local garden center. Mulch is going to reduce water evaporation. It's going to keep the soil warm in the winter and cool in the summer. It's just going to protect that soil and allow that water to infiltrate. Without a layer of mulch on top of the soil, that soil has a tendency to dry out and it becomes hydrophobic, where it becomes almost like a crust where water will not penetrate. So that's why having a nice layer of mulch on top is going to help you out. And then we're going to provide regular maintenance to our garden. So irrigation systems right now, we're going to be just adjusting our controllers for a new season. So if we're watering 3 days a week, we might be reducing that to 2 days a week. but you need to check. What we want to make sure is that the water, we're watering deeply and evenly around those root zones, and we're not watering again until the top few inches is dry on established plants. So if that soil hasn't dried out, that means, hey, we can push it another day or two. So again, we might be watering 3 days a week right now, and it's most likely we can reduce that to 2 or 1 day a week. The best time to water is between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. And the reason why is because though a lot of the municipalities are suggesting 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., understand those nighttime temperatures are really cool and moist. And when we add more moisture, we are really just inviting more pests. Black spot, rust, and as well as slugs and snails and earwigs. They really love it. So those moist conditions. So really 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. is going to be better. And we really want to avoid that evening watering. If you'd like more details about how to water efficiently, check out some previous webinars that we've taught here. And then, of course, we want to check for any types of breaks or leaks. This is the dry time of the year, and it's not unusual for critters to come into our gardens looking for water and gnawing on those emitter ends. And then, of course, if we're planting and adding new plants, it's not uncommon for us to actually accidentally split some tubing with our shovel. But understand a broken or missing sprinkler head can waste as much as 25,000 gallons of water. So that's why it's so important to inspect our gardens and to monitor for any type of waste. And hopefully, as we get into the rainy season, we need to get our gardens ready for the rains. So we want to keep water on site. It's so important. So when we have a rain event and we have any type of rainfall over surfaces such as a roof or a shed or garage, that 1,000 square foot surface, with 1 inch of rain, we can capture over 600 gallons of water. It is also really nice to keep water on site because we're able to reduce any type of debris or sedimentations, pollutants, anything like that, that might wash off into the storm drains. So installing rainwater harvesting systems can be as small as just a 50-gallon rain barrel, but as large as multiple rain barrels that can be daisy chained together. Or we can even have larger cisterns that actually are dedicated to each downspout. So there's a lot of information out there on rain catchment systems. So get curious, ask, checking in with your local farm supply or local irrigation supply is a great starting point. And I do know I included Graywater Action as a resource and the Urban Farmer. Now, keep in mind the Urban Farmer is not in Sonoma County. They're in Marin County, Contra Costa County, and San Francisco County, but on their website, there is some really great information that applies to us and it's relevant to this area, and that can help further support any questions that you might have about installing a rainwater system. And if you would like to take advantage of the awesome rebate that the city of Santa Rosa is offering, then check it out. It is fantastic. And that information is on the Helpful Gardening Research page that I provided for you. So something else that I really love to talk about, and one of my favorite things to create, are rain gardens. Rain gardens are very simple. It is really easy. Installing a rain garden is fairly low impact, and it provides so many benefits. Essentially what we want to do is make sure that that rain garden is a minimum of 10 feet from the structure, such as the house, or the overflow from the rain catchment system. So we have those rain barrels, but when they overflow, there's going to be additional water. So we want to make sure that we're at least 10 feet from the structure or from the foundation of a structure. And we want to just have a very minimal slope because we want the water to flow towards the rain garden and not towards the foundation. Typically, these rain gardens are fairly shallow. In this illustration, it says 8 inches. Sometimes we're going to work with 6 inches deep, and then we're going to actually amend 12 inches below that. We're actually creating a slight divot or a slight basin. This is not a pond. We are not creating a pond that's going to be deep. It's just very subtle. And but if we have heavier soils or areas that the soil is more clay-like and the water isn't infiltrating as quickly, then we're going to want to go a little bit more shallow, and we might even need to make it a little broader. We might even need to install multiple smaller rain gardens so that the water has a chance to infiltrate. The idea is that we're not having this water standing or pooling for longer than really 12 to 24 hours and 48 hours max. And the reason why is because we don't want to breed any mosquitoes or create any other issues that might be a problem. But this is an excellent way to capture water on site, to recharge our soil, to water our plants deeply, to really increase the overall health of the garden. And while we're able to capture this water and keep it on site, we're now preventing any type of impact or pressure that we might be extra water that might be flowing into the storm drain. I apologize. So rain gardens can be really beautiful. They are going to support the pollinators and beneficial insects and other local habitat. They moderate temperatures, and they also assist with carbon sequestration. What essentially these rain gardens are going to do, and what the intention is that they slow the water flow, all of the rainwater that's coming off of a roof and down a gutter downspout. We want to slow the flow. We want to spread that water throughout the garden over a broader area, a broader surface area, and we want to allow that water to sink in. Okay, that's really the goal. And when we can do that, we can really increase the health of our garden. When we plant a rain garden and understand that rain gardens can look like a lot of different things, they can be a lot of different shapes and sizes. They can go along the side of a walkway or a driveway where there might be a lot of runoff, but understand they're always going to be shallow, and they're going to be able to capture water and allow for significant, a little bit of pooling. So the best types of plants to plant in a rain garden are going to be our California natives, because they can take wet, rainy season as well as summer dry conditions. Some wonderful plants. This is just 9 picks that I decided to throw on the screen, but there are so many plants that are going to be ideal for rain gardens. Again, our Pacific Coast iris, our yarrow, different sedges, California fuchsias, and so forth. These are going to really be ideal because they're going to have deeper root systems. They're going to really thrive and be able to handle periods of significant wet soil, as well as periods of significant dry soil. However, as these plants are becoming established, we do want to make sure that we are going to give them supplementary water through the dry season until they're established to meet the plant's needs and what they require. More information, I did provide you with this handout on rain gardens, so check it out. We also want to increase any permeable surfaces. So if we are doing about to embark on a new landscape project, or maybe we're about to redo our driveway or add new paths to the garden, we really want to avoid impermeable surfaces. We want to increase the permeable surfaces so that water can, again, infiltrate into our garden and stay on site. We're going to work with decomposed granite, but make sure we're not using the binding material. We want this just to be the decomposed granite, the 1/4 inch to fine, so that water will still flow through. We can work with gravel, increase the gravel walkways and pathways, and then of course dried laid patio materials are all ideal. And then further benefits for keeping water on site and preventing runoff is that we reduce overloading the storm drains. That's what I was trying to say a couple moments ago. We're going to prevent pollutants from contaminating our creeks and our waterways and our watersheds. We're also going to, one moment, Kellen, can you take care of that? Okay, I just did, sorry. We're going to prevent mulch and soil and debris from clogging our storm drains when we can keep water on site. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, it keeps our gardens healthy and happy and recharges the soil. So now let's talk a little bit about strategies for preventing seasonal pest problems. So these are really going to be more of those mechanical controls that I mentioned at the beginning. So some of these overlap between cultural controls and mechanical controls, but adjusting the irrigation systems, as I mentioned and touched on, slowing the flow of the rain to keep water on site, which I touched on. We're going to understand, seasonal pests and the life cycles of those pests. So knowing that aphids really show up in the spring, I'm going to be prepared for that. Knowing that right now we're going to start to see ants coming in the home, or we're going to start to see raccoon damage around our garden. We're going to be prepared for that. We're going to install barriers to exclude these pests whenever possible. We're going to fertilize for the winter season. And what that means is right now we might be applying our last application of fertilizer for this year. And that fertilizer is going to have a low nitrogen number. That first number, remember the NPK, that first number is nitrogen. We're going to have that as a low number. Or it can, all those numbers can be the same. So it can be a 444, that's fine. However, what we want to avoid is really loading up the nitrogen right now, because remember from a past program, nitrogen is actually going to feed above ground growth. And what we want to focus on below ground growth and overall health of the structure of the plant. And the below ground growth is going to be the second number. That's the P, and then the K is going to be the third number, which is all around growth. We're going to also provide some selective pruning, and this is specifically to trees and larger shrubs, maybe anything that might be hanging over a structure or might be a problem if we do get a big weather event. I'm not suggesting that we do our winter fruit tree pruning now. I'm just suggesting that if there's any whips or anything that can, again, be a problem and tear off of a tree branch that might rip the tree tissue, we want to avoid that. So just go through and kind of do a preliminary, selective pruning now. We're also going to clean up the garden, pick up any food crops that we're no longer enjoying. We're going to take advantage of planting cover crops to protect the soil through the winter season. And as I mentioned, sheet mulching before, not only is it great to remove your lawn, but it's great for weed prevention, and it continues to support the soil health. So fall maintenance around the garden is, as I just shared, picking up any type of food crops that are ready to get harvested, anything that's overripe, or, those big ginormous zucchinis that I call those the sneakers that didn't happen to notice. And all of a sudden you go out there and you've got this 20-pound zucchini. What do you do with it? Well, let's clean all of that up, because what we're doing is we're actually just attracting more pests, such as yellow jackets, rodents, urban critters like raccoons. And so it's just, we want to avoid all of that. And then if we have any diseased leaves on plants, such as rust or black spot on roses, which is very common, we also want to remove those and get them off-site into the green waste bin. I mentioned selectively pruning plants. I mentioned fertilizing with organic, low nitrogen fertilizer, and then planting cover crops to protect our garden beds. So some barriers that we can take advantage of during this time to prevent other pest problems. Now, deer we start to see a lot more deer coming into our gardens this time of the year. Really, probably about a month ago it started, because they're thirsty and they're hungry, and food is getting sparse as well as water. So how do we keep deer out of our gardens? Well, not always the answer folks want to hear about, but with a deer fence, so a barrier. We also can use barriers to prevent gophers from chewing the roots of our plants. Those are called gopher baskets. We can also use netting and row cover to cover our plants to prevent birds from eating the crops. Sometimes we'll see that on the grapes in the vineyards. And then we can also take advantage of the benefits of scare tape. Now, scare tape is not a barrier, it's a deterrent, but it does work really well. And again, you'll see that in the vineyards and in also the orchards to prevent the birds from coming and feeding on those crops. Other exclusion ideas, well, I just want to share, these are a sample of some folks I follow on Instagram, and this is normal. This is how we exclude pests. So if you've been fighting with birds or with squirrels or rats eating your food crops and you're tired of it, as I am, we want to build a nice exclusion, either covers that go over the raised beds or actually something that we can walk in and it's enclosed. So that's just something to keep in mind. They can look really nice. They don't have to look shabby. And when we do use barriers, such as these exclusion baskets or these exclusion cages, we want to make sure we're using the right barrier, the right type of material to prevent the critters from coming in. So if we're trying to prevent rats and mice, it's going to be a 1/4-inch hardware cloth. Gophers, we're going to either use gopher wire or 1/2-inch hardware cloth. Squirrels, that's going to be 3/4-inch fencing or poultry wire or similar. And then deer, as I mentioned, that deer fencing needs to be at least 7 feet tall, unless it is a very small garden bed, like the picture that's second from the right. If that bed is really small, if that deer cannot jump in and turn around, then they're not going to jump in. So that netting can be a little shorter. But the rule of thumb is always 7 feet for, like a property or a larger bed. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the pest problems that we're all faced with right now. Gophers and moles, it has been a significantly abundant season for them. I have been battling with both all year. We had a very mild winter, so that really just supported their breeding season. And that's why I think we have more than we normally are faced with. However, proper identification is the key because moles and gophers are very different. Although they look similar, their damage looks similar, but they're doing two different things. Gophers are specifically eating the plant material. So the roots of plants, they might also come up along above like a shallow raised bed or along the side of a perennial border and start to nibble on some plants as well. They are going to have a very extensive burrowing system, but their tunnels are going to be a little deeper. We typically don't see any type of raised evidence of tunnels. Their tunnels are typically about 6 to 12 inches below the surface. And when they are digging up to the surface, typically we'll see more of a fanned shape, dirt that's kind of delivered in a fan shape or a crescent. Now, moles, on the other hand, are going to eat bugs. In fact, I find them to be quite beneficial because they eat so many bugs. They are eating the lawn grubs and any beetle larvae, any ground-dwelling beetles, and other soil-dwelling insect larvae. They are actually do an amazing job at keeping a lot of insect pests under control. In fact, they can eat up to 100 times their weight in insects each day. So I think that they're quite beneficial. I try not to, eradicate them. However, because they're shallow tunnelers, they're really tunneling at about 4 to 8 inches below the surface. They really can cause quite a bit of damage, especially if you've got a nice like ground cover area or like a pristine kind of turf area. And again, they have a very elaborate burrowing system. And because both of these critters have such elaborate burrows, it is more challenging to manage them with some things that are on the market, which I'll touch on. So let's talk about gophers. The best way to manage gophers is really with exclusion. Okay. So as I mentioned, working with that 1/2-inch hardware cloth or gopher wire and gopher baskets to prevent them from accessing the root systems. So align raised beds with gopher wire or hardware cloth. I also have learned to line the bottom of my half barrels or any type of wooden planter boxes with hardware cloth because they can chew through that wood, no problem. I've also learned from this sad experience that I was faced with my beautiful butternut squash. They will come up on the side of a bed. They see a vine. They know when you've got vining food crops such as zucchini squash or winter squash, anything that's vining on the ground, they can suss that out and they'll come up from underneath that food and they will gnaw on it very secretly so that you don't even notice. And then they are enjoying this beautiful food. And then when you go to harvest it, you're up for a big surprise. So now what I do is in my raised beds, I try to grow all of my vining crops up in some type of a basket or a support, maybe a trellis, so that they're not on the ground. And for some of the crops that are on the ground, I actually have a skirt of hardware cloth that I put around the perimeter of my raised beds and planting beds so that if gophers were to come up, they'll be blocked by that wire. Now, working with traps is really the best way to manage gophers. We want to reduce their populations, but it's not easy. But we need to be persistent and patient. There's a lot of traps on the market. Just trust me, when we can get traps in those in their tunnels and then we see that they've buried them, that's actually a good sign. We just want to remove those traps, clean it out, put the traps back in the tunnel. For more support and some guidance and helpful tips on placing the traps or setting the traps. These traps don't come with directions most of the time. So the UC IPM program, the Statewide Integrated Pest Management, the University of California, has a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and in the search bar, you just type in those 5 letters, UCIPM, all their videos come up. And it's a wealth of information. There's so many videos on a lot of wonderful pest tips. However, in this case, you're going to see a number of videos on placing gopher traps, identifying active gopher tunnels, how to set different brands, different types of traps that are commonly on sale in our retailers. And so you might ask, what about gassers and baits? Well, what I can share is that because these gophers have such extensive burrowing systems and they are very smart and they are very fast, if they sense any danger at all, they can close off an arm of their tunneling system faster than a blink of an eye. No joke. So that means that they're just blocking that one tunnel, that one section of the tunnel. They're still going to be actively moving around their burrow and actively, digging more tunnels. So that's the story with the gassers. Now baits, a lot of those baits we see on the market, they're not natural food sources for the gophers, so they have a tendency to push them out of their tunnel, which then now allows that bait to be exposed so that pets or children or other wildlife can come and, maybe nibble on it and it'll be a problem for them. These are poisonous baits that we want to avoid anything getting in contact with. So let's just talk briefly about moles. So moles are actually going to create these mounds that look very much like a volcano or just a perfect mound. They're not going to be crescent shapes. And as I mentioned, I consider them to be beneficial because they eat so many insects each day. But if we want to remove the moles, we want to remove their food source, because then if they don't have insects to eat, they're not going to be in those areas. And the way we do that is with beneficial beneficial nematodes. Beneficial nematodes are microscopic worm-like organisms that feed on soil-dwelling insects. So check it out. These resources are on that resource page. There's a lot of information on which species of beneficial nematodes would be best, and then how to apply them. And for more information, you can check out our fact sheets at the ourwaterourworld.org website. So let's finish up with some integrated pest management tips for raccoons and other urban critters. So I'm not sure if many of you saw this article last year in the San Francisco Gate when there was this little gang of raccoons that just popped out of the bushes when this family was on a walk. But raccoons are more abundant now than ever, and they are really a growing problem and a growing concern. So let's talk about some ways to prevent and exclude raccoons. Well, first of all, we want to prevent them from coming into our attics and getting into our homes around the roof by placing tightly fitted hardware cloth around the attic vents and the eaves of the roof, because they like to get into those attics and they'll nest, and that's a big problem. We also want to contain the garbage cans and the green can waste. We want to make sure they're locked really well. We also want to lock the dog and cat doors at night, because they will freely walk in if those doors are unlocked, and they can wreak some havoc throughout the kitchen. We also want to make sure we do not feed our pets outside, or if we do, we limit that pet food. We'll feed our plants for a limited amount of time, and then we'll remove that pet food. We do not want to leave pet food outside, because that's going to attract our raccoons. We also want to make sure we're absolutely securing these chicken coops, because it is just not a good situation when a raccoon gets into a chicken coop. We want to secure compost stations. We want to make sure that food sources that are in the compost are not accessible to raccoons and other critters. We want to harvest our food crops in the garden. We want to make sure we've cleaned up those food crops. Any fallen fruit from the fruit trees also we want to clean up. So does this look familiar? This is very common right now. If it hasn't started yet, it's about to happen, where raccoons will start to roll back turf areas, and we'll start to see skunks. They actually make little whirls in the soil looking for grubs and other insects to eat. So how do we prevent this? We'll also, another good thing to keep in mind is this also works for squirrels and cats. But we want to exclude whenever possible. And the best way to exclude the critters from digging into your garden areas is to put some poultry wire or some type of a barrier on top of the soil. Poultry wire works really well because it's relatively inexpensive. It's easy to move and bend and to pick up, and it's lightweight, and we can just store it on the side of the garage or the side of the house. So these are things that really help for preventing grub damage in our lawns. We want to keep those turf areas really healthy. So understand that when the turf areas are healthy, we're going to have less pests in those turf areas, which means we'll have less critter activity. And then we want to remove that food source, because we want to train these animals that there is no reward. If we do not have grubs in the lawn, then we're going to train the raccoons and skunks that there are no grubs here. There's no reward. So you won't have any luck in my garden. And we all ultimately do not want to feed the wildlife or encourage them in any way. And keep in mind, it is unlawful to feed wildlife. It goes against our California Code of Regulations. You can learn more about this on the Fish and Wildlife website, but this also includes coyotes, raccoons, foxes, possums, bears, mountain lions, and bobcats. And how do we remove that food source? As I mentioned before, beneficial nematodes, because they feed off of soil-dwelling larvae like grubs. But some folks ask, can I trap and relocate my urban critters like raccoons or squirrels? And the answer is no. We don't want to make more problems. First of all, there's no guarantee what you're going to catch. If you happen to catch a skunk, then that's a bigger problem. It's also very dangerous. These are wild animals that have strong claws and strong teeth, and they will try to bite you. It's also the rules for the state of California is if you catch on site, you need to release on site. We don't get to relocate. And sadly, that animal has to be euthanized on site, but it has to be euthanized humanely. And that means we cannot suffocate or drown it. And that means, in the incorporated areas, we can't use firearms. So in unincorporated areas, you can, but not in incorporated areas. And then, and just understand that relocation is prohibited. And the reason why is because it can cause a lot of problems. One, if that animal has rabies and we relocate it to another area, we've just inoculated that area with rabies. There's more problems, but we can get into that at another time. The UCIPM has the digital version of that book that was just on the previous screen. This is a cool new feature on their website. So go to their website, check it out. If you need some support in identifying what is chewing your food crops or what could be nibbling on your plants, this is a really great place to start. It's going to help you identify what that pest is or who that critter is, because again, if we can't identify the problem, then we can't solve the problem. For more resources online, of course, for pest management. And like I said, we're going to be diving really deep into a broad spectrum of pest problems and prevention next month. But the Our Water, Our World website, as I mentioned, has that catalog of fact sheets. We also love to get a lot of support from the UCIPM website for pest management, because this is our California State Pest Management resource. And guess what? We live in a a summer dry climate, and this addresses how to manage pests in our climate. There's also bugguide.net, which is really fantastic. If you find some bugs on your property that you can't identify, you can take a picture and email it to them, and they help you with pest identification. And then if you have some pesticides or that you would like more information on their toxicity level or how to use them or what pests they're good for, or if you just want to learn a little bit more about pesticides, the National Pesticide Information Center is an amazing resource to help you identify less toxic pesticides, and also tips for some pesticide management. If you're looking to hire a professional, because sometimes we need to hire a professional with some of these urban critters that are more challenging, both the UCIPM and Our Water, Our World have these fact sheets on how to hire a pest control company. So check this out. They give you some really great suggestions of questions to ask and how to kind of navigate who would be the best company for you. So went through that. I feel like I just went through that lickety split, but I did want to keep it to the before our 5 o'clock hour. And hey, thank you for joining. I will stay here as long as you'd like to answer your questions, or if you've got any comments. I know that was a lot to take in, but I would love to hear from you and help you with any questions and offer you any kind of support that I can.
Thanks, Suzanne. Very informative. I've got a few questions here in the chat and Q&A, but please feel free to add some more if you all have any. Let's see, let me just pull this up. Someone's asking regarding planting in fall, is it generally okay to plant new plants through mid-November in Sebastopol?
Yes, yes. A good idea is to, well, what I would do is actually, I would understand when our first frost dates are, and I would like to really get plants in at least about 4 weeks before the first frost date. And the reason why is oftentimes when we're buying plants from the nursery or the garden center, they might be coming from other areas and they haven't exactly acclimated to our area. And I know 4 weeks is short amount of time, but just keep that in mind. If we happen to plant something new to our garden and we do happen to have a frost warning in the forecast, just cover those plants with a frost blanket just to protect them until they're a little bit more established. And another thing to keep in mind, if we happen to have had a rain event and our soil is really soggy, we do not want to walk on our soil. We don't want to dig around the soil. We really want to wait until that soil has dried a bit. Okay, so that's also a nice helpful thing to keep in mind.
Great. Someone was asking, and she may need to clarify this a little bit more, but what was the percentage of compost to soil? And this was kind of earlier on, so.
Yeah, our goal is to always, we really want to have kind of a 5% organic matter in our soil structure so that it is, and we do that by either amending the soil with compost at planting, or for established garden beds, we can side dress or top dress with just, an inch of compost and then get a nice couple inches of mulch on top of that.
Great. Someone is asking, when you're sheet mulching, should the cardboard or paper be wet down before you put down the mulch?
Either way, it kind of depends. I think that it's sometimes recommended that it's watered down first, but then if you're walking on that cardboard or wheeling over with a wheelbarrow, sometimes if that cardboard is too soggy, it'll tear. I have learned just to only water it down lightly if it's really windy. And even if I'm putting weights down, the cardboard's still moving around, like if unexpected winds showed up. So typically what I do is I'll put my mulch on top and then I water as I go. And I know that takes a little longer for the water to get in there because that mulch is so nice and thick, but understand that water will eventually percolate down.
Great. Someone is asking if the rebates are only for Santa Rosa residents. I can answer that part. We do have great rebates for Santa Rosa residents, but there are other cities that also offer rebates. So if you just Google your city name and then rebates, or even County of Sonoma and then rebates, water rebates, you'll find things for your particular city. Anything to add to that, Suzanne?
No, I know there are some cities that don't necessarily have rebates similar to City of Santa Rosa. However, I do know either that Sonoma Water has rebates that will also support these other cities within the county.
And do you know, last time we had a big drought, the state stepped in with additional rebate funding that could be on top of your local funding. If your local region didn't have any, they would do the whole thing. Do you know if that's happening?
I don't. And that's a good question because, for instance, I know City of Hillsburg right now has, they have I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, mandatory no more outdoor water usage. So we're not allowed to irrigate our plants with the city water. You can only water your plants with water you have captured from last year's rains or with gray water systems. So they might have some additional rebates to offer because they're in that kind of state of emergency level.
Great. Someone is asking, where can you find information on nematodes so that they can get rid of moles? Where do you learn more about their food source?
Oh, so I had listed this 3 resources, which is the Tip Top, Rincon Vitova, and was it Oricon, which is organic pest insectary. Those resources are also on the helpful gardening resource page that I emailed to you earlier. If you didn't get it, I can email all of these out again later. Yeah, I can email it out again.
And here's a really good question. It's, if I plant native plants, do I need to still use gopher cages?
Oh, that is a great question. Yeah. Yes, you sure do, because not all of the native plants are going to be gopher, not attracted to gophers. So typically salvias are a sure bet. You don't need to put them in gopher baskets. And because, or, like anything that has a really strong pungent scent, but I had gophers eat some of my coyote mint, a salvia, and an agastaki. So there's no guarantees. And when the food sources get to be more minimal and water is more minimal, these critters are going to be a little bit more desperate.
And you can, if you're planting small plants and don't want to, well, now I have to get a gallon size gopher basket and get bigger plants. They make these little they're almost like a steel wool that roll onto the plants. That can be an affordable way if you're planting a lot of plants, because I know it can get kind of expensive to have to put a cage on every single plant. And then any last questions? Somebody's just asking whether or not we are working with HOAs and landscapers, because their homeowners association hires a landscaping company that unfortunately only offers toxic solutions to weeds and pests, which is very frustrating. And so this person's wondering whether Our Water, Our World is reaching out to those groups to reach more people.
Thank you so much for that question, and I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, well, yes and no. We provide education to as many people as possible. However, in the case of your HOA, I will share, if you can get a petition going and getting other residents to sign it and give that to the head of the HOA, since you all are paying your dues, you should be able to dictate who gets hired and what kind of services are provided on that property. So that's how I would probably start off with that one.
Great. And then a couple more questions came in. Someone is concerned about using bark as mulch. They have family members with allergies. Does that create a lot of dust? And also wondering if they've heard if bark or mulch can harbor fungal infections and molds, and whether that's a problem.
Those are good questions. So I will share straight out the gate with the fungal molds. When we have mulch, we're laying it out. So sometimes if you buy a bag of mulch or any type of landscape materials, sometimes there could be moisture in there. And when you open it up, it's either a little anaerobic, or maybe it seems like it's a little funky with a scent of mildew. What I do is I lay it out, and the sun is going to dry out those spores and make those spores no longer maybe viable. It's not going to be a wet environment. Ultimately, we want to keep areas dry, including that rain garden. Rain gardens are not designed to hold water for more than that 12 to 24 hours, as I mentioned, worst case scenario, 48 hours. But we really want our gardens to drain, unless it's intended to be a pond. As far as allergies, it depends on the materials. So for instance, we get a lot of wood chips from local arborists. My husband works for an arborist. We have a chipper, things like that. There are some materials such as bay that is very fragrant, and it does cause me to sneeze. So you can just be a little bit more aware of what are those wood products that you might be allergic to, and try to avoid those. Typically what you're buying at the local garden centers is just a fir bark chip. And those are typically very mild. I don't know if you would have allergies to that, but and again, going with the bigger chunk is going to be less little particles.
And to add to that, if you wait until it's rained a few times and you're getting material from a landscape supply company that has outdoor storage of their material, then when you go to spread it, you won't create as much dust. And then once it's settled down, it's not so dusty. It's really just when you're spreading it the first time that it can be kind of kicking up some dust. So that would be maybe just a timing issue for you. And then one last question is there anything in place for water rebates for unincorporated areas of Sonoma County? I'm looking into it too.
Yeah, I'm in an unincorporated area, and sadly, I haven't found any rebates for West County yet. I really wish there was. Um, so yeah, maybe Kellen will find
I just
something good.
I just put a link in the chat that has rebates for local sanitation districts. This is through Sonoma Water, which also has all of the links to the different rebate pages for all the different cities. It's not necessarily really focused on outdoor savings, but they do have different commercial water efficiency rebates. They have some high efficiency toilet rebates, front load high efficiency clothes washer rebates. And they may have some other things. It looks like there's something for sustained reduction. You may be able to prove that you've reduced your use, but it's tricky because currently with a lot of folks, they don't have like to fund these programs. Typically, at least from my perspective, working for the city, you have to be able to show that water use reduction to justify the spending. And because many people in unincorporated areas are on groundwater that's unregulated at this point and we don't really have a great sense of how much a person is using typically, there's not very much, there's not a great way to monitor how much you're saving. And that makes it kind of difficult for these unincorporated areas to figure out how to fund the programs. So that's a tricky thing.
Thank you, Kellen. That is so helpful. I really appreciate that extra information. I was just looking at the chat and I see that someone very much appreciated your lawn alternative suggestion. Yeah. So it was new to me and Kellen suggested it and I had to look it up and I was like, wow, it does look like it's a champ. So thank you.
Yeah, that plant is a champ. Yeah.
So
Phyllonoda. That's a good one. So
in regards to bulbs, I can share that gophers are not supposed to eat narcissus bulbs. Narcissus bulbs are anything in the like daffodils or paper whites or any of those types of things. However, I've had that experience. Now, I imagine that gopher definitely had a tummy ache afterwards. And it wasn't so much of a concern that I'm going to plant my daffodils in baskets because they naturalize so well. But I just noticed that there was a little bit of an issue once. But for the most part, you can plant daffodils without deer or gophers nibbling on them. So.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions. So thank you all so much for attending. And Suzanne, thank you for sharing your amazing knowledge as always.
Thank you.
We do have a workshop coming up next month, October 19th, same time, a Tuesday from 4 to 5. And that one, do you want to tell a little bit about what that one will be about?
Yeah, well, we're really just going to focus less on what to do around the garden and more on prevention tips and tricks. We're really going to dive more into how we use tools, and we'll talk a little bit about some eco-friendly pesticides if we need to use them, how to use them properly. We're going to talk about dormant spray season because we're going to be right around the corner from our dormant season. And, anyone that has peach leaf coral or has had, woolly apple aphid or anything like that, we're going to talk, I'm going to go into detail on that and really support you with the dormant season and all the benefits of taking advantage of applying pesticides during that time. Because believe it or not, if you do need to apply a pesticide, it's the best time to apply one.
Great. Well, we hope to see you all next month, October 19th. We'll probably send out an email letting you know when that is. And thank you all again.
Thank you. It was so wonderful to have you all here. Thanks for your great questions. Enjoy a wonderful evening. Thanks, Kellen.